start with a little background on the Michael teachings. Starting in the late 60s through the early 1970s, in the San Francisco Bay Area, it was the progressive center of the world. There was the famous Esalen Institute, where people would go to raise their consciousness. And there were especially two married couples who would go together to study all the latest personal growth ideas. So together they would go for past life regression, or try drugs together. In 1973, they decided to try a Ouija board and see if they could get a message. The main person to move the planchette was a woman named Sarah Chambers, who maybe would partner with her husband or one of the others. And she started channeling. First, she channeled a 7th level old king from another planet, although he was communicating via the astral plane. For a while, they truly believed that he was going to come to Earth for a visit in person. The house that the Chambers lived in was designed and built by her husband. And knowing that this king in the physical body was very, very tall, he raised the doorway for the guest suite. And then the UFO never showed up. It was so annoying. But there was some lovely information from this soul. Then she started channeling a guide from the astral plane, I think named Tomas. And then after a few months of that, something changed. They got the famous first message from Michael, "We are with you today." And that was the first Michael channeling. And over the months and next couple of years, they started downloading what became the foundation of the Michael teachings. The roles, the goals, the attitudes, exactly the same as what Diquella transmitted through Varda. So they generated as a small group many, many pages of channeling. Originally, Sarah, who's a brilliant writer, was going to write a book, but I think she got tired of it by the mid-70s. She met an author named Chelsea Quinn Yarbrough. That was her pen name. She was actually pretty famous for writing horror novels like vampires. She's still writing books like vampire books, as far as I know, and she has a big following. She sold the rights to her transcripts to Yarbrough, and Yarbrough started to write the first Michael book, called Messages from Michael, which was also the name of a popular song at the time. So it was a little bit of a joke. Sarah did some special sessions for Yarbrough when the original group was not meeting so often anymore. And the first book was mostly Sarah's channeling, although some other people also did the Ouija board. Shortly thereafter, Yarbrough also started channeling, but in her 4 Michael books, she kept this a secret. She is a very private person, and also she got some death threats from fundamentalist Christians when her books came out. So she always pretended like she was just a member of the group. She got thousands of letters of people asking questions for channeling. And understandably, to protect herself, she would say that the group would not allow it. So there are now 4 Michael books by Yarbrough. My favorite is the second one, More Messages from Michael. Her last one was in the 90s. She still has a group that meets regularly. There must be thousands of pages of material, much of it very good, but she never published another book. In the meantime, there were other people who started channeling Michael starting in the late 70s, in addition to a couple of other people who were in the original group who also sometimes channeled. Once Messages from Michael came out and people read the material, they started channeling. I could not estimate how many people have at least temporarily channeled Michael. At this time, maybe there are 10 of us that I know of that still channel. And many people find Michael comes to them and they just channel for themselves or their friends, and we never hear about them. In the early 1980s, Varda and Frank were in Oregon to see Osho. Frank visited a sannyasin friend in Santa Fe, New Mexico. He saw messages from Michael on her bookshelf and became very excited, and he shared it with Varda later, and she became very excited. She came home and started channeling. Naturally, she assumed it was Michael. Within a couple of years, though, the entity said, well, actually, we are a cousin of Michael called Diquella. So she stuck with the first original Michael material. In the meantime, there were other channels bringing in more than the 8 basic pieces of information. Deserving special credit is a woman named J.P. Van Hull, who still channels. She also still lives in the San Francisco area. She is very fluent. And in the 80s, recorded a lot of cassette lessons about different new things in the Michael teaching. In 1986, I had just moved to New York City from Colorado, and I was back visiting, and one of my closest friends was very excited to tell me about messages from Michael. She said, for example, I'm obviously a scholar, and you are obviously a sage. Within a 6-week period, I met a friend for dinner who said that there was a message floating around me. Would it be okay if he did a reading for me? I did not know what a reading was, but I have a goal of acceptance. So I said, sure. And the entity called itself Michael. And it was very nice, but it was pretty general. What got my attention, though, is that he called me Shalom. I was raised Jewish, and we would have a Jewish name in Hebrew school. And mine was Shalom because my name Shepherd had the same letters at the beginning. And then I met another friend for lunch, and his girlfriend had been part of one of the Michael groups in the Bay Area. I did not put these 3 things together at first, but I thought, I want to find the book, and I want to find a Michael channel because this is very interesting. I was working at a discount stock brokerage in New York City, and when it was quiet, we could read or write or whatever. So I thought, I need to write down these questions so I'm ready for when I find a channel. And my friend had also wanted me to ask a question for her when I found a channel. So I wrote down my questions on a piece of scrap paper, and my pencil kept moving and I got the answer. I had already been communicating daily with my guides for like 9 years, so I wasn't terribly surprised. I called my friend and I gave her the answer, and she said, oh great, ask them this now. So I contacted my friend's girlfriend. She gave me the name and phone number of a Michael channel in the Bay Area who was very nice and answered a lot of questions, gave me guidance. And so that's how I started channeling Michael. I never really decided to keep channeling. I just did it because it felt so inevitable. And I started learning from JP's channeling. So a lot of the things on the chart were not in the original Yarbrough books, but the casting was in the second Yarbrough book, More Messages from Michael. It is a chapter called Michael Math. It is infamous because you read it and your eyes cross, because they're explaining something in words that's maybe more visual. But it's actually not very complicated. The basic idea is that we're each, as a soul, part of a group of 7 souls, probably who have the same role. And each get a number 1 through 7. This is called your primary casting. Let's say you're a scholar. The scholar is especially neutral. So if a scholar has number 1 casting, then we say that that is a scholar with server casting. If you are number 1 in your group of 7, you're the only one out of the 7 that is in that number 1 position. So you are the scholar in what we call that cadence, which is 7 scholars. And that means that you like to study things in the server area. So maybe you as a scholar like to study things that servers like to do. Maybe you like to study public service, taking care of all the people. You don't look like a server, but you act like one. You are studying about service. If you are the second scholar, then you like to study things in the artisan world. So you might like to learn about engineering or design. If you're in the third or warrior position, you might like studying and working in the business world, or law enforcement or the military. So on it goes through the 7 numbers that most of you are familiar with. The scholar in the fourth or scholar position is the most stereotypical scholar of the group. You will probably guess that person to be a scholar without too much trouble. He or she is most likely to be the stereotype of a scholar. Maybe an academic or otherwise a teacher or writer. Maybe more dry and intellectual unless they're emotionally centered. The fifth position would be a scholar with sage casting. And then you will see someone who is probably pretty humorous. Not every scholar is a good communicator, even if they have a lot of knowledge. But in the fifth position, they probably are good both at learning a lot of detail and explaining it in plain language. In my experience, there is no one more verbal than someone who combines scholar and sage qualities. This could be a scholar with sage casting. It could also be a sage with scholar casting, and it could be other things. If you're in the sixth position, you might be a scholar who studies spirituality or religion. And people with either server or priest casting are often warmer-hearted, not so dry, because the inspiration axis is about warmth and emotion. The scholar in the 7 or king position studies in the king interest, maybe leadership, or just seeking precision and excellence. Do you know the concept of ordinal and cardinal here? So you know that the role of king is the most cardinal role. That means that kings have the biggest picture. Server is the most ordinal role because they are the most interested in the smallest details. One is not better than the other, but what is very interesting about casting is that the number 1 is in the most cardinal position because it's first. So if you are server, you are the most ordinal. But if you have server casting, you are in the most cardinal or influential position, and you tend to go first because you're in the first position. For example, maybe you're the first one in your cadence to incarnate on the physical plane. There's no rules about any of this. It's all negotiated and chosen, but this is then the tendency. 4 is always in the middle, and so scholar is always in that neutral position, neither ordinal nor cardinal. So this first number is the most important casting thing on your chart. But there are a lot more numbers. Every cadence is in a group of 7 cadences called greater cadence. This is also a strong influence. Because it affects all 7 cadences, you could say that it makes a bigger circle around you than your primary casting. So your primary casting is just you in a group of 7, but your secondary casting applies to all 7 of you in the greater cadence. It's not so much what you do with your own role energy, although it is to a degree, but it is what your friends and family will notice more about you, because it's a bigger circle around you. And so making a bigger circle, people see it. So that is the second most important number of your initial casting. What do I mean by initial casting? What I mean is that you as an eternal being, what I call a spark of the Tao, and Tao is the all that is. You chose to come with many friends to the physical plane of Earth. And when you were ready to launch out of being full-time in the Tao into the universe, you got together with maybe 1,000 other souls, agreed to be part of a soul family, and then the Tao spits you out into the universe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is your initial casting. It means you came from the source into the universe in that order. And that's why you have those numbers on your chart. There's a third number, which is the order of your group of 49, or greater cadence, in its string of greater cadences. Here's where it changes a little bit. There does not have to be 7 greater cadences in a row. In your entity, there may just be 1 greater cadence of scholars, or there could be 9. The third number tells you which one you're in a particular cluster of scholars. Because it applies to so many souls, it's not a very strong influence. But I put it on the chart because I want to see if it's reinforcing something else. So if your numbers are 333, that is very strong warrior casting. That is triple warrior casting. And people might mistake you for a warrior. But sometimes it's just not very important. Most of you know that we're each part of a soul family, which could be maybe 800 to 2,000 souls. Usually it's around 1,029 or 1,300, something like that. 7 entities make a cadre. Your entity's position within its cadre is also part of your casting. But because it applies to 1,000 souls, it's especially diluted. Still, everyone in your entity will have a little bit of that flavor of the number. My entity is number 2 in its cadre, and so we are in a cardinal artisan position. So there is a flavor of creativity. But Varda has taught you that it also matters what roles you have in your entity. So if my entity has a lot of sages, even the souls who are not sages have a sage quality. So people in my entity like to joke around even if they're not sages. J.P. Van Hall calls my entity the loudmouth entity. So this is your primary casting, or your first casting from the Tao. There's then a whole new different kind of casting. And I call that raw number casting. So with that, what happens before your first lifetime is that all the souls in your entity gather on the lower astral plane, and you start planning exactly what you want to accomplish as an entity on the physical plane. It's like reshuffling a deck of cards. Everybody takes a different position that's different from their initial casting. This material comes from J.P. Van Hall. I only learned it in the last few years and felt moved to add it to my chart, especially because Varda told me she was also getting raw numbers. A raw number is a number between, say, 1 and 1,500. Let me correct that. Probably between 1 and 1,029. And then the extras might be something called wild cards. Or up to 7 souls can have the same raw number. So that's how you get more than 1,029 souls in an entity. And probably never less than 1,029, but maybe, I don't know. Have I totally confused you now? That was my goal. No. Not really. But any of you who got a chart from me got a folder called Chart Reference Material. And in that is another folder. Again, folders within folders. It's like the cadences within the greater cadences. And that's called raw numbers. They're numbered 1 through 5 because you should read number 1 first. There I explain the difference between initial casting and raw number casting. And you might need to read it a couple of times. The second one is a graph from J.P. Van Hall. There, if you got a raw number of, say, 690, you find it on the graph. And if you look on the graph, it will tell you something called your community responsibility and your global job. There are 49 of each. But your community responsibility is in a column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. This correlates with Varda's path. It took me a while to figure that out. I had to ask Varda questions and JP, and I figured out that they correlated. I asked JP to channel my raw number, and that's 41. It turned out there are 2 other Michael channels in my same group of 7 in the raw numbers. The other 2 are Steve Cocconi and Mike North. If you look at my 41 on the graph, it's in the number 6 column, the number 6 in the number 1 block. So that reduces to 661. JP may say 166 because she might start with the block. But in any case, what was fascinating to me is that people always thought I had to have some priest in my chart because they thought I was inspirational. I thought it was just my goal of acceptance meant that I was a nice guy. When I got my raw number, totally inspirational. So it was very nice for me and for many people to have that additional information. So then I look up my community responsibility, which I think is trust and faith, and a global job of welcome. And I'm a very welcoming person, just naturally. I don't have to try. This is a diagram from my book, Journey of Your Soul. And it shows a group of 7 scholars. The person that I made up is in the number 3 or warrior position. So this is a scholar with warrior casting. His whole cadence is in the 7th position of his greater cadence. Each of these small circles have 7 scholars, so there are 49 here. 7 and 49. This particular entity has 3 strings of sages, 4 of warriors, 5 of scholars, 7 of priests. This is a much simplified version of something that can be very mind-blowingly complex. But we always have to understand cosmic things in simplified ways. Our human brains are not capable of understanding the huge complexity of the universe. But we can get some nice, simpler models that help us understand. So, on this scholar's chart, his numbers would be 3, 7, 5. And this whole entity of about 1,000 souls is in the 2nd position of its cadre. So a cadre may on average be about 7,000 souls. The cadres are cast from the Tao at the same time. Time is the wrong word because it doesn't really apply, but they are cast in that sequence more or less together.
Another question?
Yes?
I have a 5-1-2 casting, and you spoke about the greater cadence as more or less you only watch out if it enforces other things.
Yes.
As you know, I'm in entity number 2.
With me? He's my soul brother.
Would that already be an enforcement that you would think of more, or?
One thing we did not talk about is the essence twin or twin soul, twin flame. Your essence twin is either discarnate, meaning they're not in a body, or they're in a body as a male or female. Your chart says which is true for you. If your essence twin is discarnate, there's an especially high amount of what we call bleed through. That means that if your essence twin has a role different from your own, you have strong secondary energies from that other role also. A discarnate essence twin of a different role, it is as important as your primary casting. If your essence twin is in its own body, there is less bleed through, and your primary casting is the most important one. What's really interesting is when your essence twin bleed through and your primary casting are of the same role. And this is the case with Klaus. Sage primary casting and sage essence twin bleed through. So Klaus, for you that would mean that almost equal to your inspirational nature is the sage urge to find insight and to communicate to others. It's not enough to just feel the inspiration, you need to express it. Is that true for you?
Absolutely.
No.
Yeah, I initially thought I'm a sage before.
So this is what I call, when they're doubled, I call it an honorary role. The third influence, please be silent. Shh. Now class. The third influence for Klaus is server. It's 1. 1 correlates with server flavor, but it is in the most cardinal position. So in that way, it's a little like the priest that he already is. But people will see Klaus, who are close to him, as someone who cares about the common good. The cadence position stands out to friends and family. So maybe they think, I need someone to help me move, I'll call Klaus. The third number is artisan. It doesn't really enforce anything that we've already seen. It's a little flavor of the artisan. Maybe makes him a little better with his hands, a little more interest in the arts. But artisan and sage are on the same axis. They're both expression. So the artisan casting reinforces the sage influences here, just as the server secondary cadence reinforces the priest. Also, Klaus and I are in a number 2 entity, so that reinforces this 2 here. So far, we see that Klaus is an essence who is completely inspirational and expressive. So far, we don't see anything on the action axis or the assimilation, but we may see it later in his chart. So let's scroll down. Dominance is a goal, that's action. Perseverance is a mode, that's action. But not so much.
Moving and impatient.
Yes, yeah, there's more, yeah, they're there, more minor. But yes, very few people are all on just 1 or 2 axes. But we look for what is reinforced more and what's less. Now, let's look at the raw number, 477. It reduces to 163. Okay, so here I'm going to open the raw number folder, and I'm going to look on the graph, and I'm going to do a search, and I'm going to put in 477, and where does it come up? It comes up down here. The entity in raw number casting is divided into 3 parts. The first big piece of it is the truth side. Truth is intellectual. The second third is the love side, which is emotional. And the third side is energy or beauty, which is more kinesthetic. So here we see, when we search for Klaus's number, there's a person 134 on the truth side and person 820 on the energy side. They all have a community responsibility of forgiveness, but Klaus focuses on the love or emotional type of forgiveness. 134 focuses more on the understanding of forgiveness, and 820 focuses on the energetic feeling of forgiveness. They also, all 3, have a global job of usefulness. In the other handouts, you can look up global job of usefulness, and you will get a few paragraphs explaining it. Same with the community responsibility of forgiveness. And you'll notice that it's server and priest, and Klaus is already priest, so it reinforces who he is. It's in the third block. This whole thing is called a block. So there's also an influence of wanting to be productive as warriors are. I told you that with primary casting, the first number is the strongest. I asked about raw number casting. Was the first one more important? And I was told that it really depends on the person and the situation. It really isn't quite the same in that regard as the initial casting. The initial casting it's who you are. The global jobs are more what you do. They're still important, but maybe not as important as the initial casting. They're also more relevant to the physical plane than the higher planes. It doesn't disappear entirely when you're full-time on the astral plane, but it's not so deep. Your primary casting is always who you are all the way back to the Tao. I'll give you an example. I generally channel king members of the Michael entity. There are also a lot more scholars than kings. That's just warriors than kings. But I usually channel the kings and I can feel the difference. J.P. Van Hull is a warrior and she channels warrior members of the Michael entity. When I channeled the warrior one time, I thought I sounded more like J.P. Now, the kings I channel might be a server caste king. And that feels different than a priest caste king or a king caste king. When I channel for questions and answers or a lecture, usually it's a group of members of the Michael entity who work together, and the words are chosen by whoever has the best information. So they blend together. But when I'm channeling charts, I don't really need the whole gang. So right now I'm working with a server caste king, and he likes to help me. He's a nice guy. On your chart, everything in the top half is for all your human lifetimes. Anything in the bottom half can change from lifetime to lifetime. Klaus has a number 1 path because it's in the first column. So anyone in this column has a number 1 path, as I understand it. When I was figuring this out, I asked Varda if she thought that that was correct, because I'm in a number 6 column and that would be the path of silence. She said, no, I think you're like me, a number 1 path of touch. Then I asked Frank. He said, no, you are absolutely path of 6. And I asked a few other people and they thought I was path of 6. I'm not very silent because I am a loudmouth sage, but I do like solitude and quiet also. For a loudmouth sage, I'm pretty silent. A lot of the Michael channels still think that there's only one kind of casting and they mix them up. I would love for them all to read the essay I wrote in your raw number folder. It's a little tricky though, I don't want to step on any toes, but I think more and more people are getting it, that it just doesn't make sense as one system. They're really 2 different things. Michael told me that there will be a 3rd casting when we're all done with the physical plane. That you don't have to worry about it until you're dead. And I'll be there and I'll explain it to you. Priest, king, essence, twin, bleed through, cardinal, king casting, ordinal. Yeah, that's it, yeah. And you can lead in the big and you can lead in the smallest detail. And look for excellence. Scholars may be interested in a lot of facts, but it's the demanding things be exact, which is more the king. Sometimes people with king casting are sharp-tongued, a little harsh. They'll cut you off. You are a sage honorary scholar, even without even if you did not have an intellectual center, you would probably be very verbal. Is that true of you? But generally, do you tend to be extremely knowledgeable, detail-oriented, good at explaining things? Are you very interested in a lot of different kinds of knowledge? Are you interested in explaining things with great detail? There you go. Yeah. So an honorary scholar, it would make you an excellent teacher, probably writer also. True? Yes. I have secondary scholar casting. I tell people that I'm actually the strong silent type, but they don't believe me. Like John Wayne. That's me. All right. The sage is interested in communicating understanding. The scholar is interested in collecting details of knowledge. And together, they have a great way of gathering and expressing knowledge. So this is, yes, orientation. This is the only thing on the chart where I was the original channel. Years ago, I asked Michael, do they want me to put raw number on the chart? And they said, no, but we'd like you to put the side of entity on. But that was their sneaky way of getting something new through, because it wasn't the same as the raw number side of entity. When the Tao enters the universe, it divides into three qualities. The first quality is love, which is inspiration. The second is expression, which is intellectual. If you go down the chart, you'll see that intellectual center is also expression axis, whereas emotional is on the inspiration. The third force that comes from the Tao is beauty, or energy, which corresponds with the moving center and the physical center. So you could say that the universe is made up of love, truth, and beauty. When you come from the Tao, you probably orient in one of those three more than the others. Let's say that you are a priest but with truth orientation. You might seek truth. As a priest, you still have compassion, but if you're a priest with love orientation, it's more extreme, because they reinforce each other so much. The one with the truth orientation might be a little more blunt about what he or she sees as truth. The one with love orientation might be softer and warmer, more forgiving. The one with beauty orientation might be more concerned with the inspiration of nature, for example, or might be more athletic. Some of us combine two of the three. I combine love and truth orientation, so I'm always trying to convey truth in the most loving way. My friend who is a healer combines truth and beauty, so she's always trying to correct the energy so that it's aligned with the true design. Channeling is not perfect, unfortunately. Nothing is in the universe. Sometimes it's like the Indian parable of the blind men and the elephant. You see different parts of the same whole. There are some things in channel teachings that are really hard to prove one way or the other. In the Yarbrough books, it says that Michael is entirely warriors and kings. It's become almost an orthodoxy that you don't dare believe something different. One Michael channel suggested that there might be some scholars in there too, and of course we burned him at the stake. How dare he question the Yarbrough books? I joke that I asked the Michael entity to line up so I could count them. Of course, the kings wore a crown and the warriors had a shield, and I didn't see anyone carrying any heavy books, so I'm sure there's no scholars. But, really, there's a lot of things we can't prove. It's pretty easy to prove the role influences on your chart. I mean, at least to validate them. One of my favorite parts of the Michael Teachings material is something on the website michaelteachingsplural.com. Dave, Greg, and I worked on a photo database of the different roles and secondary influences. We collected photos that were good examples of each role and each secondary. So you go to the server page and you see server with server casting or essence twin and all the other 6 secondaries. If you study that, you will really learn to recognize what the roles look like. Not everyone is as clear an example of their combination in terms of their eyes and facial expression. But for example, many priests have hot, penetrating eyes. Many kings have sharp, knife-like eyes. Or if it's a secondary, it comes through in a softer way. My opinion is that you can probably validate the things that are really important to you. The things like, is someone else in the same entity as I am? I would go by how they feel to you. They may not feel like it, even if they are, because maybe they have a personality that's more difficult for you. But very often you will feel like, oh, I know you. I just connected with Klaus and we immediately knew each other. And then I channeled his chart and I found out we were in the same soul family. I do feel a connection with most of the people I've met in my soul family, but nothing's 100% all the time. The problem with the composition of the soul families and many other things is that the first channelings tend to be more accurate, although not always. And if I ask what is the composition of a particular soul family, if it was already given a few times, what I get may be way off. So I avoid even asking that now. As I said earlier, I always heard that my entity had a lot of sages in it. Klaus was told that his entity had a lot of priests. Well, I know a lot of priests in my entity too. I just don't worry too much about the things that I can't prove for sure. I would just look at it as fun and interesting. The most important thing on your Michael chart, besides understanding your essence here at the top of the chart, is working on your obstacles or your fears. If we want to grow, we must try to observe and reduce our obstacles. That is the most important thing we can do to be happier. The other thing we can do is reduce how much time we spend in our negative poles. But the great thing about having the basic chart information is that we realize that we are the way we are for good reasons, and so are other people. The default of most people is to think that other people are the same as me, but not as good, because I would never do the things they do. But when we know the charts, we say, this is a king. Positive pole is great, mastery. Negative pole, tyranny, makes me want to hide under my bed. And I would never be mean like that, but I also wouldn't be strong like that. I speak from experience. My father was a mature king with warrior secondary. My stepmother was a baby soul king, and my older brother also a baby king. And I basically hid under my bed for my whole childhood. But now I understand. They have a whole different set of strengths and weaknesses than I do. My father told me when I was a teenager that someone would kick in all my teeth if I didn't learn to shut my mouth. He could not understand me, the loudmouth sage. And I couldn't understand him because I didn't understand that we are different for good reasons. Now, we can have kings who are very positive much of the time too, like John Kennedy, who had a goal of acceptance, and Christine Nerschel, who's perfect in every way. Yeah. So people do their negative poles in different amounts. When we're in our positive poles, it's always beautiful because it's love-based. But nobody does their positive poles all the time. We just work to be more in the positive poles. So it makes this information very useful for our growth. We're good? It's been a beautiful night with you all, and I'm very grateful you invited me. And I can stay to talk personally afterwards, but I think we should close now.